Hi everyone, welcome to episode 52 of This Valorant Life. In this episode, Adam and I are going to get into a topic we've covered before, but I think we may have different opinions today than we did back then, which is, can anyone actually make it to Immortal? And so I think it's probably useful to just recap. I think in a previous episode, and Adam, you jump in if I'm getting any of this incorrect, we had talked about the idea that basically, if you're willing to work for it, we do believe that you can get to Immortal. It requires a lot of work, some people more work than others, and maybe focusing on different things. What has changed your opinion on that recently, Adam?
And I don't know if this is like a reality check for me. Like, this could really just be a skill issue as a coach and like the way that I kind of go about coaching. But what I've kind of seen in my client results is not only making the push to Immortal difficult, but even climbing in Immortal, like making Immortal 1 to Immortal 3,
Mm-hmm.
feels very, very difficult. It almost feels like you're running in place. Um, I think that I've worked with clients that put in a ton of work. Like, they'll play all the games, they're doing the warm up, they're doing the aim training, and then we have good coaching sessions. And then when we actually look at the game, it's like, why aren't we doing X, Y, Z? Or like, oh, how is this still happening? Like, why are we still losing? And it's sometimes it gets into that pattern of like, this is just like either new stuff, like completely new stuff, or it just feels so like we should start coping. And
We, as in you, along with the student.
yeah, like if I'm looking at the like sometimes I'm like completely stumped. So like I do want to acknowledge that like this is probably a recency bias and like a failure bias type of thing. But the more that I work with clients and see how difficult it is to make that push to Immortal or even beyond, I'm starting to slowly believe that unless you dedicate literally everything to do that final push, it might not be in the cards. Or it could just be that my timeline isn't long enough yet.
As someone who's made it to Radiant multiple times, and the last one quite recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? Wouldn't it be even harder getting to Radiant than climbing through Immortal?
Yeah, and I guess that's another point too. It's like when I look at people like that are in Immortal and have been trying to get to Radiant for a long time, and they have like, let's just use Zasco as an example. He's been on his journey like for I think almost a year now,
Yep.
and he's not Radiant.
Yep.
Um,
Where's he
and
now?
I believe he's Immortal 1 or Immortal 2.
Okay.
So he's made some progress, but he's putting his all into this goal,
Yes. Yep.
and he's not Radiant. And like I know that's only one case study, but I've also worked with some other players at like Immortal 1 to 3, and they want to make the push to Radiant, and they don't make the push to Radiant. And it really does make me wonder in the back of my head whether or not, like, I don't want to say it's a genetics thing, because ultimately I don't think we're at the stage that genetics is the factor for separation here. But I think that it's not in the cards for some of these individuals because the things required to get them to that point is not very clear to me. And I thought that it was a matter of like having a very good process. Like, you do a warm up, you do your ranked blocks, you have play with high intensity, you have some type of reflection process. And if you kind of have those things there, with enough time, you'll kind of make the climb and slowly improve. And I'm being somewhat proven wrong on that. I think like I don't really know what that looks like. I guess like
The thing that comes to mind for me is I just wonder, because I think this is the area that's the least understood, the least sought after, is the mental piece. And we had actually talked about whether we should talk about this topic versus another one. But I
it
feel
ties
like
back
this is
in. Yeah.
probably the underrated part of Valorant and in these types of games. I think um my wife and I were actually talking about she was talking about the drive to survive.
Mm.
And one of the things she was noting from one of the previous recent episodes she watched was that all of these drivers are amazing drivers to become part of F1. But some of the best drivers are not actually technically necessarily the best drivers. They're the mentally most strong and resilient drivers. And that's in a sport where you really can't think too much. You're just in it, right? Because there's no pre rounds when you're driving a race car where you could die if you make a mistake. But I think that's the difference with Valorant. Valorant, in many ways, is much more like tennis. Tennis gives you the time and space between points to berate yourself, to get frustrated with your mistakes, or in Valorant, the pre-round is the uh, analogous piece. Gives us time to blame ourselves, or often blame our teammates, blame the map, blame Riot, and blame the meta of the game, the status of the game. I think there's a piece there where I just really wonder whether a substantial number of players are self sabotaging in between rounds or sabotaging the level of their performance that they could actually ultimately perform to if they were actually 100% locked in from a mental side.
I think that is true. Like I agree with like all of those points. I guess there, and it seems to apply true in my case as well. Like if I reflect back on my experience competing, mental was one of the main things holding me back, I think, and maybe I could have pushed more as a player with better mental. Not in terms of actually just performing in the game, but with a better mental, you're naturally more curious, which means that you might develop even faster. So I think like based on those points, it does make sense that that could be an inhibiting factor. But when I think of like to play devil's advocate and using Zasco as an example again, I would wager he has a lot better mental than your average Valorant player. And
Yes.
if that's the case, then why is someone like him not in Radiant? And then also, why do you see so many players in high Immortal 3 Radiant lobbies with the worst mental ever known to man? And I would also put myself into that bucket back when I was competing. And it's like the frustration I'm having, I guess, and the realization I had with this recently is why does it seem like all of the edges that you can try to work for and gain isn't actually what's at the top in a game like Valorant, at least not yet. Like we look at League of Legends or we look at any top sport, like you have to have, you know, the edges. Like you have to have good mental, you have to have the nutrition down, like the physical side. Obviously, they're physical sports, but everything's a lot more, I guess, professional and earned, and it feels like that's not the case where the people are trying hard in Valorant. Like it's not actually showing. It feels like, and it could just be I'm looking at the wrong sample size here, but it feels like, at least in the rank ladder, the people that try the hardest aren't actually at the top, and the people that aren't trying are at the top. And it makes me question, I guess, my previous beliefs.
What do you think then is the success factor for the players that are at the top?
I want to say like volume, like sheer volume, and they just brute forced it. But there are also people that have a crazy amount of volume in the game and they just aren't, also like they aren't high rank. So if volume isn't the only requirement, like it's what's the quote? It's like necessary but not sufficient. Then the other thing would be mindset. But like these players have notoriously bad mindset, so it might not even be like having a growth mindset is the requirement. It might be something different. Like if I think of like your natural, not your natural, your average like Immortal 3 toxic player, they don't have growth mindsets, right? Like they're very toxic. They're maybe I shouldn't say they don't have growth mindsets. They have like very toxic personalities in the game,
Sure.
and they're climbing. So maybe that's like I shouldn't equate the two. Like toxic versus growth could be different. I don't really know. Like I just, it does baffle me sometimes, I think.
I wonder, I was reading that book recently, which we'll probably do another podcast on at some point. And it made a really useful statement, which is that all performances are odds based events. So even chess is odds based in the sense that sometimes you'll have a good day and a bad day. I'm sure even amongst a chess player with perfect information. But layer in a game like Valorant where you have four random teammates, a new map, different agent comp, and then your own personal variability, you have a lot of different odds that are fighting. Um, I just wonder then if it's really maybe less that um, it's impossible for a player to climb to immortal, and I just wonder if all performances are odds based events, that as you get closer and closer to the top, that if your margins above another player are slim enough, you need a huge sample size for it to be realized. I just wonder if that because there are a lot of things in life where the climb is asymptotic. As you reach closer and closer to the top, the edges become smaller and smaller, and so I wonder if that's the case here, like between Immortal 3 and Radiant, whether those edges are really small. And I wonder then, for a player like yourself who's made that climb before, I wonder if maybe for a player like yourself and other players that have made it to Radiant, some of those edges that you've accumulated are invisible to you.
I would say almost certainly. Um,
Because how
like
many times would you say you've had to explain a concept that you haven't realized you needed to explain? Like you knew it intuitively, but you hadn't actually put words to it before.
yeah, I mean, early on in my coaching journey, I would say like every session, like after gaining a lot of experience over the years, it's not as much now, but it happens from time to time. And there are some things that I find harder to explain than others. Um, yeah, I don't
So,
know.
I mean, there's also an element here then, Adam, that it's not just the growth of your students, there's also the growth of you as a coach, right?
Right.
I, there's this great book called Anti-Fragile. I think you and I have talked about it before, but he talks about this concept of what we call knowledge is usually related to what we can talk about, the things that we can put to words and articulate. But he said, puts this forward, this idea that our knowledge is actually way bigger than that. The example he gives is I think they went and visited a really primitive, cut off from the external world tribe, like First Nations or Indigenous tribe, and they gave them a bunch of pieces of string with like kind of a spectrum, like a rainbow of colors, right? And they're like, tell us the names of these colors. And I think of like, let's say I forget, like 30 or 40 colors. They could name like 4 or 5 or 6. Like they had words for 4 or 5 or 6, right? And then the moment they said, okay, now just organize this in like color groupings, they could like organize it perfectly. And so I think what's interesting there is what they could actually name is very narrow, but their knowledge, their ability to have a concept of something is broader than the language, right? And I feel like for most Radiant players, there's probably a bunch of things like that, like a bunch of things that are natural and inherent that you do very subconsciously that have not necessarily all been articulated yet.
I mean, it has to be the case, I think. Like, it's not a matter of like whether or not it's, um, like, I don't think that would be, if it were untrue, then everyone would be,
It would be super volatile. You'd see people in the top 10 and then they would never be
right,
Radiant again, right? But
right.
it would be like the current stock market.
Which has been crazy. Yeah, it's been a bit crazy. Um, yeah, I definitely do recognize that it part of like the client and the relationship with the coach and I is like, or the coach and the student, that relationship is like part of their journey is my responsibility. So if they're putting in the work based on what I put out, which if they're putting in the work I tell them to put in, and they're not getting the result, then the responsibility inherently lies on me. That I think is true. And given that that is true, it means that I'm not able to correctly diagnose what they need to do in order to climb. And I think that is likely that is almost certainly the correct, I guess, conclusion. But I don't know what those diagnoses would be, because I would assume in a game like Valorant, a lot of it is going to be simple decision making, like a simple framework to follow your decision making. And then it's about executing, like even on defense, you can kind of flowchart most of the basic concepts. Your starting position, how you want to, like you would have like an A site hold, you would have a B site hold, you have an A aggression, you would have a fast rotate position. And then as soon as you have like all those pieces down and you know how they work together, It's just about actually performing it in game, and that is the biggest thing that people miss out on once they are in Immortal or making the push to Immortal is having that streamlined game plan. But when we have created those game plans and we're doing the warm up, we have all this other stuff, and like I feel like everything is in place and we're not seeing the progress, it's very confusing, I guess. And I would say, like, just off the top of my head, I would say if all of those things are in place, 9 out of 10 players would hit Radiant or make the push higher. But I would struggle a lot to have high confidence that if someone has like super plateaued, if they would make the push to Immortal or make the push to Radiant. So I don't know, I guess, what my point is, but I guess that's my
I
current
think two things come to mind
experience.
for me.
Yeah.
One is like the variability of human um the variability of humans, and just like what works for each of us. And then the second one is I would put a little bit of caveat on your assessment of yourself, that if it's not working for them, that it's your responsibility 100%. Like, I think it is partly your responsibility for sure, but there, I think it's deeper than that. So first one is the variability of human humans on a spectrum. I think what works for I'm trying to think of different players.
Like Roger Federer.
Well, just for Valorant, right? So what worked for Demon 1 to get to tier 1 and become a Radiant? I'm sure he's a Radiant, but become a pro is very different than, I'm trying to think of like a different player,
Like a boaster.
a Boaster, or like even just a very functionally different player, Leo,
Okay.
right? Like both are at their peak very, very dominant players. In fact, like some people refer to Leo as like one of the best players in Valorant, right? And Demon 1 was certainly that title at one point. But I think what it looks like to optimize for their individual journeys, you're still optimizing for win percentage. You're optimizing for winning rounds, and you're optimizing for winning gunfights. But the way they do that is really different. And I think maybe there's an element of that. Not dissimilarly, what we find for workouts, and it just, this is the one that comes to mind for me, is um, there's this great group of people called 3D Muscle Journey. I used to get my coaching for them for fitness and nutrition, and the example they use is like one of their coaches who's like a super decorated bodybuilder, very, very strong, like basically maxed out naturally at this point in terms of muscular potential. Like he can barely do any volume. Like he does very minimal volume because anything more destroys him and he can't train.
Mm.
And then there's other guys on the same team, similarly jacked, have to do way more volume to get any gains and to maintain. And so what that tells us then is like what the average amount of volume really didn't tell them how to optimize for themselves. And I think there's a lot of average advice in Valorant too that we have to think about. Like, not only is it advice about what to do, it might be advice for the average. And so if I'm not in that average range of how I play, then how do I adopt this for myself? So that's number one. And number two is you certainly have a responsibility as a coach to help people understand. But I think a bigger thing is just helping them notice too. Because at a certain point, if I'm a player and I'm plateaued in Immortal 1 and I don't know what to do, I'm just playing games, I have no idea what I'm doing wrong, I just know I'm here, I'm stuck, and then you give me like the golden nugget of information to progress from Immortal 1 to, let's say, Immortal 3, that's super helpful, and I'm sure everyone would be really happy with that. But I think the parts that missing is that that player never got taught to notice it for themselves. And so like an example for me is like, and it's funny because I learned this doing stuff that I thought would be boring. Skiing. In skiing, you have to get on your edges to turn your skis on the mountain. And what I noticed, I usually ski really, really quite fast. And when I'm skiing with my kids, I have to ski slower because they ski slower. And also, like, I'm trying to do drills with them so they can get better at skiing. And what was interesting was I'm skiing with them and I'm doing these drills, and then now I'm realizing, hey, actually my turns to the right, so when I turn with my left ski, are way worse than my turns to the left. And I'm like, why? Like, why are they so much worse? And I realize it's because naturally I lock my foot in a more stable position on my right than the left. But it took me a whole day to actually figure out that my left foot was in front of my body. I needed to bring it under my body. And then I felt way stronger. But it took me like a whole day of skiing to like notice that, and I fell a bunch of times. And what was interesting for me is that when I unlocked that, not only did I figure it out, I unlocked the knowledge for me to figure out similar things like that in the future for myself. Like now I can notice for myself rather than waiting for a coach to tell me something about what I'm doing with my body, right? And I feel like there's an element of that here of like not always is it's helpful, but it's not always 100%, and it's actually not always supportive to make it your responsibility to teach the student every single thing. I think sometimes part of your responsibility is helping them develop that for themselves.
I agree with that. I One of the things that I subscribe to is like coaching with the intent of making a player self-sufficient rather than coaching a player to, I guess, keep them on the hook for forever. Um, Maybe I haven't found the best way to do that. Like it could definitely be my approach doesn't allow for that as much. It could also just be limited to my approach is limited to what I felt worked best for me, and I haven't been able to explore other possibilities. Like for example, the general advice and approach that I have for the game is have a strong mechanical foundation, have a simple playbook, don't emphasize communication and team play all too often until you're a strong individual player first. And I believe by that. But potentially, there's players out there that could make the push to Immortal or Radiant if they do the opposite. If they take as little agency as possible individually in terms of gunfights and gameplay, and putting as much agency over like managing teammates and all that stuff. But I like a Boaster, for example, when he plays in pro play, like an IGL, and he micros all of his teammates. But I guess my counter argument to that is I don't normally see Boaster high up on the rank ladder. Like oftentimes he'll end Immortal 3 and things like that. So I feel like it's a different skill set there to be a Radiant and like consistent Radiant player and maybe like a high level IGL and pro play.
I I think we often think in like binary ways. It's like this or that, and I think there's an element there where the mechanical focus is probably always going to be important. But I sometimes wonder, or I wonder as you say that, whether it can be a yes and. I think there are players for whom, like yourself, maybe that mechanical focus is enough, and then you just focus on team play. But I could see where some players maybe their mechanical focus their mechanical aptitude or capability just needs to be good enough, and then they just index from there on playing off teammates and working really well strategically and macro wise. I could see that being a path to high Immortal or Radiant as well.
Yeah, and it definitely could be. And I guess it just hasn't been true in my experiences. Like even when I think back to some of my old teammates, one teammate in particular, like when we played with him, he was always a Mortal 3. He never hit Radiant. And I competed with him pretty much my entire career. And he was a great player, and he was able to kind of, hold his own in competitive matches, in structured play. But he was never able to transfer those skill sets into the rank ladder to hit Radiant. I think after some point, like after a couple of years, he did hit Radiant, and he has that like act badge now. But when I go back and look at his tracker, like he's not a consistent Radiant player despite hitting it. So I don't know. He comes to mind when I think of like the opposite aptitude and like those indexes, because he very much indexes on the other side of Valorant. Yeah. Which, to be fair, we're talking about going from Immortal to Radiant, and the original question was going to Immortal. Mm-hmm. So maybe the original question is like, if you do index on the other stuff, you'll be able to hit Immortal, but you might plateau.
So, and I think that's not different than necessarily where we were before. But I think part of this too was like you were feeling a little frustrated
For sure.
around um, this gap, and I wonder, there's a real difference. That book called Greatness, which we will talk about in the future. One thing he talks about in the book is like aligning our actions with our values makes it feel really different. And so, you know, what I'm hearing from you is like this like weight of needing the answer. And I think it'll be really different if you approach it as a student of the game being interested in figuring out what you're missing. Like
Mm.
moving from that I have to so that I won't feel like I'm under the gun or not delivering to I get to. I'm excited about figuring that out.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that makes sense. I think that definitely aligns with what I would expect, I guess, just based on my own journey looking back at it. Like, I have a lot more inclination with working with players that are mechanically dominant
Mm-hmm.
rather than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably for that reason. Whereas,
Mm-hmm.
like, I would assume Woohoojin would have a much, like, the opposite experience. Like, he probably is more inclined to work with the,
The big brain.
like, the type A, big brain, overthinker type of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, or, like, yeah, those type of archetypes. Um,
But one thing you mentioned at the beginning of the call, Adam, was also that sometimes you will see players making the same mistakes that they've already talked about.
mhm.
And so I'm presuming then you've already said, hey, in the next 5 games or 10 games, you're going to focus on this. And there's this idea of like, you've kind of like, we should have solved this by now. So what's your experience in then of players actually making changes fundamentally to how they play? Do they always fall back on bad habits or sometimes or not at all?
I mean, it definitely depends on the player. I found that some players can immediately just like plug and play, like what we just talked about, especially if it's like playstyle stuff, like fast
What,
rotate, do this, do this, do
what's the
this.
difference between players who can adopt it quickly and players that don't?
Um, hmm. If we're talking role wise, I've found that duelist players and clove players specifically are a bit more flexible with how I want them to approach the game. Whereas I find like all the other roles, like more support roles, they have like a very strong view on their starting positions, how they want to play the map. And even if they understand my point, um, they have played the other way in so long, their own style for so long, that it's not as plug and play. Like a lot of it is like resistance. So something that I will recommend, which with one player I'm working with now on the coaching series on YouTube, Pixel. He's the Sova initiator or recon initiator player.
AC Diamond?
Yes, he's
Yeah.
diamond. So he has experience playing in coordinated, playing under peel and stuff like that. So a lot of his gameplay is playing more team oriented, not taking as many risks, slower rotate, maybe even playing hard anchor and extremity. Like on a map like Haven, he's just the A long player, or on Ascent, he was traditionally the B player. So in his case, I advised him to play fast rotate like 12 out of 12 rounds on defense and do that for a week and see how that feels. And the problem is, not every map you play the fast rotate on initiator. So he wasn't implementing it on some maps, like Fracture, for example, which Fracture naturally you should be contesting neutral space. So like he has a good understanding of that. And that also means that if that viewpoint disagrees with what I would expect the fast rotate to be on some maps, then we aren't implementing it all the time. So to be like we've made progress on that front. Like he is implementing those things, so we're moving in on that front. But that is kind of the resistance I'm talking about. Is like naturally some players are able to kind of plug and play if they're more of like a duelist controller, duelist clove player, because I think the way that they've gained value in the game is mechanically. So they're more adaptable to new ideas on the other side of things, and yeah, the other side of it is not so much. Maybe those players would be more receptive to mechanics. I don't know. Like maybe they'd be more plug and play with mechanics, maybe, but I don't know.
Is it because a lot of players, especially in the non-duelist roles, you would say, have like a really strong idea of what's correct?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, I fall into that bucket too. Like when I would compete and I played scrims and stuff, like I would play ranked trying to follow that bucket, and it was kind of like an L every time. So, um, what is fundamental and textbook and cookie cutter in terms of decision making tends to not work well over the long term in ranked. You kind of have to have a different framework and playbook and playstyle to ranked, in my experience.
In that Called Greatness book, he has this one fundamental piece called psychological flexibility, which is, are you able to adapt to the context? Are you able to adapt to the current situation? And so I think about that a lot in terms of Valorant, because I think for a certain type of player, maybe it's more that support player. I probably put myself in this category. You want to watch enough YouTube and enough videos to be like, oh, this was correct. Like, irrespective of what happens, whether we win or lose the round, I could say I played correctly, right? And then I think maybe the duelist default is more just like, well, it either won the round or it didn't, you know? And I think in this case, a big part of it is being able to adjust. I feel like having that psychological flexibility of not, this is correct, rather, this is the way this game is going. This is the way my team is playing, and this is the way their team is playing. And so, what do I need to do to try to win these rounds? And I think it's that lack of psychological flexibility. I think that crutch, it's almost crutching, I feel like, on what I believe to be correct, rather than trying to figure out the solution of right now, what do I need to do to win this game?
Yeah, I guess like what comes to mind for me is like a different term is adaptability. I think like they're kind of relating to the same thing here. Um, I think that is a good way to describe it. Like maybe the players that are struggling to hit these higher ranks and pushing back their plateaus is the lack of flexibility or adaptability, just in their play in general. And that I think the more I think about it seems to be true. Like if I think back on my play, it's like both play styles are correct in different circumstances. But me as a player, I'm able to kind of identify and also flex to the different play style when I can recognize it. Now in coordinated, it's a bit harder, but in ranked, I can very clearly go from one end of the extreme of the play styles, and maybe that's what's missing from these other players, even
I
if
wonder
they
if
have
most
bad mentals.
players, I wonder if
Mm-hmm.
most players, like when a game is not going the way they want, I think for most players, the common strategy is to do the thing that I'm doing even harder,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm just going to do it even more. I feel like most people aren't like, let's try something different.
Yeah, that's true, I think.
So I wonder if like part of it then, that flexibility is, and you would do this naturally, is having a bigger playbook, having a bigger like chameleon of styles that you can play into to suit the game so that you can win the games. I'm guessing maybe that's the thing. In a fixed team environment, you actually don't need to be that flexible
Mm-hmm.
because you have a role that you're playing into that is suiting the team construct or the team environment that you've built for yourself.
So I guess that brings up the question then: how do you develop adaptability and flexibility?
I think I think it's not anything different than before, which is I don't think it's any different than the things we've talked about. You know, when you can't hold B, you watch players that are playing your agent and how they hold B. I wonder then if you are struggling with a more risky play style, maybe you just need to go watch some Jing. or whoever, just like what
Someone
does
in
it
the
look
chaos.
like to
Yeah.
go crazy, like I think Alex told Jing a couple times is like sometimes I just need you, or something, I'm not sure, just you just got to turn off your brain,
Yeah.
right? um or different types of play styles, like because there's a variety of different archetypes of players, and I wonder if it's just like at times looking at how that type of player plays and then maybe just trying to implement parts of it, or just deciding in a game I'm going to go into this game and play like so and so, and just
I
trying
think
it on.
I think what you said at the end there is a tactic that is underutilized. Like going into a game and trying to pretend to be X player. Like something that my natural inclination when I play Raze is not to play like Jing. He's like the whole double satchel in, go crazy type of thing. When I play my Raze, at least traditionally learning it, I played it more of like a initiator, pseudo initiator. Like I would nade, I would boomba, I would use my util very selectively, and then I would like instead of satcheling in, I would throw my satchel at them. And that's kind of how I approached Raze. So like when I was learning the Jing thing, I was like, what would Jing do? And I was like, I'm gonna play like Jing this game, or like kind of go down that route. And I would unironically find a lot of success just like pushing crazy aggressive timings, or just like double slashing into the bomb site, which I didn't think was possible at the time. So I really like that frame. I wonder if it's better in a player's growth to have two different role models to look at in the same role that play completely differently.
Yeah, I think that's
And
really great.
yeah,
Well, and I think, even as we talk about this, I think the one of the inherent benefits in terms of mental approach, and this is again from that drawing from that book, is we we have to disabuse ourselves. We have to get rid of this notion that you can win 100% of your games, right? Because I'm sure you've had clients be like, hey, I got 13-1 in this game, like what could I have done? And the reality is like, even if you're peak demon 1, there's nothing you can do in this game, right? there's
right.
there's no world where you win that. I think, and then once we can zoom out from that, like we can't win every game. One really helpful thing to realize is if we can't win every game, we shouldn't be aiming to. We should be aiming to improve as a player. And if we zoom out from that, it means we can have license to try out in certain games for the sake of my own improvement. It may not be optimizing for my near term win rate, but it is optimizing for my overall growth as a player. And I think that's a much healthier perspective to take for yourself than I just need to have a 60% win rate at all times.
It's like in theory, then, if a player has like all the checklist items, like the warm up, the rank games, playing with high intensity, a review process, and then you implement this idea of like being more adaptable and trying to address adaptability by looking at different ends of the spectrum, is that enough to get to confidently say that all players can get to Immortal? That's not really something I've explored, I guess.
I think over time, probably. Well, it remains to be seen, right? But I feel like maybe for the sake of it, when I think about initiator, I think on the one hand you would have like Sasi or Hiko, and on the other end you would, or maybe Calm, right? And on the other end you would have like Azito, right? So for the other agents, like where would you, like maybe for duelist it would be like a something in Jing versus a cryo,
Aspas,
or a Yay.
Cryo, yeah. Aspas, Cryo, yay. Yeah. Zekken evens at some extent.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
for Sentinel, is there a super aggressive Sentinel? Would a Benji Fishy be a super aggressive Sentinel?
Nats as well, I think. Nats is very run it down. Benji actually plays the opposite of Nats on
Okay.
defense.
Okay.
Um,
So, because Nats is always looking for those crazy timings.
he
Like
is.
Nats's entire goal in life is how do I shoot two players in the back,
Yep.
right?
Yep. He's a very creative player. He knows how to play around his smokes and cages really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So like a Benji Fishy and a Nats would be a good one. And what about what role am I missing? Oh, controller. Who's a really
Um,
aggressive controller? Like Xander?
Xander comes to mind for pro play. For the ranked ladder, I would say um, probably Knights or
Knights.
Canes. Like they play hyper aggressive clove in ranked.
Okay. And then what would be the opposite?
Like a boaster, like a I'm trying to think of someone that plays really correct. Yeah, probably like a boaster. I do notice in Xander games, at least on Ascent, he will lurk more than
Yeah.
going with a team. Um, I'm trying to think of Astra players, like who used to play Astra, because that would fill in that niche. But
I
the
mean,
only player
not
come
many pros play Astra anymore.
not
I
anymore.
can see
Yeah,
Valen playing Astra occasionally. It's not that common.
yeah. Which I think that also speaks to the state of ranked. I think. Oh, on that point too, I think the ranked meta favors my archetype, the more mechanical dominant, aggressive playstyles because of the agents, right? Like you have Clove, very oppressive. You have ISO, very oppressive.
Mhm.
Um, Jet's not as good anymore, but like still, Jet's in there. And then like you reverse that, and then you look at the support agents. Well, like how do you play a good Sova against an ISO? It's just like okay, like not like ISO is completely overtuned in that sense. And then you go down the list on other support agents. So that's also, I guess, something that I don't want to say struggling with, but like I've noticed with like the mechanical dominant players easily slot into the good agents right now in this meta.
Okay, where would Wes fit in?
That's a good question. I don't.
Because
Mm,
mechanically he's super dominant, but
yeah,
he often plays a Viper.
I don't know how aggressive he is in ranked. To be honest, I
Hmm.
haven't really looked at his ranked VODs recently, but I would assume he would play more of like a correct way, and he's just like winning mechanically. And the current, so on that point, kind of contradicting my earlier statement, which is why I find it so surprising. Um, the current rank one player in NA, his name is Note XXD. I thought it was noted, but it's not apparently. But anyways, um, he plays very cookie cutter Valorant. On Ascent, he's the A main player every single round. He will one way and stare at it, and then one way it again instead of rotating. If they're making noise B or mid, he's still A main.
And
So
so why is that working?
one is that he duo queues every single game. So if he
Okay.
anchors and his duo can rotate, it's different. And two, this guy is mechanically insane.
Okay.
Like I've looked at this point when I looked at his VOD, it was so intriguing to me. I looked at another three on different maps, and pretty much every single one of his decisions is what I would imagine in a scrim. Like
Okay.
he's playing ranked as if it was a
So
scrim.
but it's different, right? Like at the top of the ranked ladder, you can be expecting certain things from your teammates as just inherent game sense. Because he's optimizing for optimal Valorant, which maybe if you're a mechanical god, you can do it all ranked levels, right? But if you're not, it probably doesn't work. Because it just reminds me of I forget who the rank one jungler was in Korea, but he's like I think one of the it, yeah, it was a rank one jungler, and I think he's held the position numerous times, like multiple accounts that are like 1, 2, 3. And I think one of the things they found was like as a jungler, League of Legends again coming over, never ganks. Like all
Mm,
he does is farm. Like I think he just takes a gank if it's free and it's at the end of a full clear. So he's just cleared as a jungle. He's got literally nothing to do. He'll gank and then back. And what it means is that he probably loses some games because he's not there, where his teammate could use him. But on average, I think probably mechanically he's very talented as well. On average, he's always ahead. And then if you're always ahead, you're going to win more games than you lose,
right.
especially if you're a good player. So I wonder if it's almost like that. Like he's at a level and a position where he's removing variance from games.
Yeah. And on that note too, which is a bit odd, the player before that was holding the rank one position for the last three acts in a row was Knights. And he plays the complete opposite. This guy's fast rotate, and spawn every single round. And I don't know where Knights is on the ladder now. Maybe he's just busy with Cubert Academy. But
Here's the thing, though. Here's what I would say, though, is cookie cutter will always only get you so far. There's the I heard this term the first time around acting, um, that there's an art and a craft. And so the craft of acting is can you memorize your lines? Can you fake a good American accent if you're British or a British accent if you're American, right? Can you actually do it and sound plausible, right? Because it's pretty bad when you don't. Do you show up on time? Are you prepared for sets? Do you take care of your body? That kind of stuff. That's the craft, right? And so I think in Valorant, the craft is mechanics and mental and all that stuff, right? The art is, can you elevate it? Can you take that performance and make it something more? Is it more than the sum of its parts, right? It's kind of like Heath Ledger as Joker in The Dark Knight. He took the Joker and he took it somewhere that no one else had taken it before and couldn't have conceived of, right? And I think in Valorant, at the highest levels, I think for you to be a successful player, you have to have a little bit of that dog in you. You have to be Jogamo a little bit. Like you have to have the confidence and the creativity and the risk taking occasionally to push yourself to new heights. I feel like if you're always perfect, it's too predictable. Like you have to have the confidence and the charisma or the uh, risk taking to do things that are really creative. So I feel like Knights ultimately would be a better, from what you're telling me, because I've never really watched his games. Like I feel like ultimately, like he probably will have a higher ceiling than the other guy.
Yeah, or at least maybe like longer sustained success. Because like to be fair, what we're looking at is Knights rank 1 3 acts versus comparing it to Note XXD where it's 1 act. But yeah, I guess time will tell on that sense. I guess it's surprising to me that you can even climb to rank 1 in the first place playing that playstyle.
Mm.
Like I would have said that that was impossible, but now I'm being proven wrong. And maybe I just actually have been like the VODs I've looked at, the sample size is just really too small. But that's possible. Like somehow like the VODs that all of the VODs I looked at somehow were just all the same playstyle and it just happened to be that way. But I don't know. I don't know if that's true because like even when I think about when I used to play against and with him in the rank ladder, he did play that way. So
Mm.
yeah.
Cool. Well, to everyone listening, I hope that was an interesting discussion. I know we were working it out as we were going along. So, as always, thanks for joining in. We still have the community going, TVL Tent, and we will have that going for a long time. If you want to take part in that, it's $5 a month, and it goes directly towards a scholarship to someone to get 2 months of heavily discounted coaching with Adam. So if you want to support that, you can find us, This Valorant Life, at ko-fi.com. Thanks everyone for joining in, and as always, we appreciate the support.
Thank you.